We are delighted that this week's episode is sponsored by the Animal Guys, who tour the UK and Europe educating audiences about all creatures, great and small.
Having just completed a sellout theatre tour, what makes the Animal Guys different is they've developed an entire show that involves no live animals.
They truly believe in learning through laughter and educating families today so that we can save the animals of tomorrow.
To find out more and for tickets to their tour, just Google The Animal Guys.
I really didn't like Turbulence, but then once I'd had children, that fear of turbulence really intensified, and any little bump I'd feel really hot and sweaty, my heart would start beating, and I found myself glaring at the cabin crew because I kind of told myself, if I see them panic, then that's my cue to panic too. It's really common as a parent, even if it's only just been a minor unease with flying, but it's quite common that the minute you have children, you then start to get even worse because suddenly it's not just about you anymore. You're responsible for this new little life. And as a result of that, you find yourself risk assessing life in general. But, you know, flying, fear of flying is so incredibly common. I think the stats say about 1 in 3, but it's probably a lot more than that, really, where people feel unease.
I suppose there's no stats from liking flying and disliking flying or being frightened of it, because I think if there were those stats, it would be a hell of a lot more, because so many people do fly, but they hate it.
And it's kind of something that we work with so often, probably one of the most common fears that we work with. And back in 2015, we happened to be asked to help a lovely chap called David Berlin and to help him over his fear of flying. And we are delighted to say that David is joining us here today. Hi, David.
Hello.
Hi, David.
Are you right?
Yeah, 2015. How time flies.
9 years ago.
Yes.
Time flies.
It doesn't it? See? So we met you in 2015, obviously on TV. It was a TV show. And if I remember rightly, it was you actually contacted the show because your sister was getting married abroad and you couldn't go.
Yeah, so my sister decided she wanted to get married in Mallorca. I was like, great, cool. I don't want to do that because I have to fly on my own. And it was actually a friend of mine who was a journalist. I think she wrote for Marie Curie. She said, oh, you should get in contact with this person because they do, and they explained what you guys do. And I was like, oh, okay. And then after many conversations, I had this phone call going, okay, so next week you're going to be on television and the Speakmans are going to cure your fear of flying. And I was like, yeah, sure. Good luck. And yeah, you did.
Were you sceptical?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because once I realised who you were, I YouTubed you.
Of course.
And it was, I can't remember who it was, the girl from Atomic Kitten, was it?
Yes, it was.
Liz
Yeah,
McFarlane.
Liz. Yeah,
Liz, that was it. I watched it and I was like, nah, she's just acting. Which is hilarious because I'm also an actor and people have said that about me after watching the show. So I was super sceptical. And yeah, then you kind of...
Yeah, I remember.
I remember actually meeting you in the hotel the night before because we didn't. Yeah. Obviously, we didn't know what you looked like, and it bumps into you. And actually, at the time, I thought you were a member of the crew because we'd not met the crew at that point either. And then going on the airfield, and one thing that really sticks in my mind because, and I suppose it's one of those things that whenever we've worked with anyone with a fear of flying, and we've worked with loads and loads, if we're doing it for a TV show, it's usually a small plane, because that's something that they can hire and they can have there. You can't have, a big commercial airline. So, and the thing with small planes is that, if you get an issue with turbulence, the turbulence is always a lot more. And I remember going to the airfield with you, and I remember the pilot trying to start the plane, and it was turning over, and I thought it's not going to start.
Well, I think I remember we were filming a snippet before the show. Yeah. And I think I might have swore.
Oh, really?
And we had to stop filming, had to refilm it because I went, I'm not getting on that. Like, stop, not doing it. He's not even starting.
Because it kept. I think the plane kept stalling, didn't it? But something I don't think you probably. In fact, I'm not sure whether you even know this, Nick. So, big sort of big announcement here. So, I did have a phobia of turbulence. Well, yeah, it probably was a phobia. It started as a discomfort and a fear, and then having kids, it became a full-blown phobia, I think, because literally I would squeeze onto Nick's hand until it went white. However, here's the big announcement. I overcame my fear of turbulence on the same day that you overcame your fear of flying. It was with you that I overcame my turbulence.
No way.
It really was. And the reason that I overcame my fear of turbulence was because that pilot that we had flying the aircraft for you, he had been a pilot for something like 30 years, and he then took retirement, and he was flying the aircraft. Anyway, before we went up on the aircraft, I just sort of thought, flipping heck, if we've got turbulence, this isn't going to look great. You know, here's me trying to cure David, and me having a freak out with turbulence. And I said to the pilot, I said, I have a real severe discomfort around turbulence. And he said to me, let me explain it. I said, okay. So he took me to the side of the runway, and because obviously it was a private runway, and it was a very hot, I think it was quite hot. It was sunny that day, or it certainly got warmer. And he took my hand and he said, let me put your hand over the tarmac. What can you feel? Well, the tarmac was quite warm, so I could feel the heat sort of waves coming up on my hand. He said, now put your hand over the grass. And I put my hand over the grass. He said, what do you feel? I said, well, it's cooler. It's nothing really. He said, that's turbulence. He said, it's the different sort of temperatures and that you sort of, so one will push you up, one will come down. It's pockets of air. And he then went on to say that it was absolutely impossible for the aircraft to fall out of the sky during turbulence. And he, with everything that he told me that day and me helping me understand and me realising, actually, if you put your hand over, say, even, obviously don't touch it, but over a cooker ring that's warm, you can feel those heat waves, and it does, you know, your hand kind of feels like it's rising a little. So understanding turbulence that day, unbeknown to me, helped me to overcome it. And ever since then, I have been fine.
Because I think you did explain that to me in my therapy session. So you must have had this conversation with the pilot, and then you went, oh, well, let me tell you about this. I've got this really good thing about turbulence.
Yeah, I bet you were dead impressed, weren't you?
Was.
It was all
she's known that for years.
But you were making notes, weren't you? I'll share this with David. Tell him.
I did.
Because I still, to this day, one thing you said to me, because I can now get on a plane, I can sometimes enjoy it. It's not like my favourite thing to do, but I can actually get on a plane and I don't think about it. I don't get the sweats. I don't cry. I don't do anything. But I don't like turbulence. But who does? No. Who enjoys it?
And that's the thing to say, isn't it? People don't like turbulence because why would you? It's like, as I always say, it's like choosing to drive your car constantly down cobble streets. You'd never do that, would you?
You'd never do.
You know, and even like driving your car around at the moment, there's potholes everywhere. Again, it's the same thing. Or, you know, going on a cruise, obviously, because I know that you've worked on a lot of cruises, when it hits bad weather, you know, and the seas are choppy. It's the same thing. You wouldn't choose those things. However, so no one particularly likes it, but I think the key thing is not to be frightened of it. And obviously you're not frightened of it, you just don't like it.
So, but the first thing, because you have that, when you get the initial like rumble of turbulence, your heart goes, but then all I have to say, I take a deep breath and go, it's like waves in the ocean, because that's something that you told me.
Yeah.
Even 9 years
She didn't know that one before. She didn't pick that up
10
on the
minutes
day.
before she had therapy with me, she found out it's just like waves in the ocean. And I say that even to this day.
So I'm not sure if you're aware of this, so just for our listeners, some common causes.
Yeah, so I was going to actually ask, so if anyone's listening and kind of wonders how that happened with David, because even before you go into common causes, I was really intrigued as to what David's cause was, and whether David knew what his cause was, because that's a common thing, isn't it, that often people don't know where that. So before you met Nick and Eva, did you know where your fear of flying came from?
No.
See, isn't that interesting?
Interesting, yeah.
Because it's often the case.
Because it was... And during my session, we'd gone through all my times and experiences where I've hated flying. And it was only when I got to this certain one that I think it was you, was like, oh, there's the start of the knot, because you've unravelled the knot of fear.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. That's where you've started it. And it was something that I hadn't even thought about. Like, couldn't even contemplate that it was...
So tell us, what was it?
Can I just tell you how we got to that? Because you said that you'd had a particularly bad flight somewhere. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah. So I was 17.
Not the answer. Not the answer. There was one. Like you said, I had this really bad flight, and you were sort of convinced that it was that. But
it was that. Yeah, I was coming back from a ship. I had to fly San Diego to Florida to.
He said London. It was 15 hours and it was hell. That's what he said.
It was absolute hell.
You used those words.
Yeah. Which is really interesting, because what people often do with all phobias, actually, not just with the fear of flying, but with all phobias, is that when they come to us, they will say, I have a phobia and it started with this, and we'll hear it and go, doesn't sound right. And the reason why we know it doesn't sound right is because they will often say, I had this situation and it was just awful. I just couldn't stop panicking. And it's like, well, why were you then panicking? And that's what people often don't ask themselves. They think they know where it started, and it's usually the first time they are responding having already created the issue. So something happens, you create the issue, and then the first time you respond, it's like, oh my God, where's this come from? So this feels like hell in its favorite words, and that's when you think it started. And that's why people often have unsuccessful therapy, because they go to therapy and work on that first time responding, but not responding to the right.
So the key to unlocking this door, because David was convinced that that's what it was, and when we said to him, it could, it must have happened before then, any idea? And the answer is no. So what you've got to do is acknowledge that. You see, if you say no, I've no idea when it was, then your brain goes, yeah, okay. And that's it. You will not get any further. Yep. So what I said to you is, when you said no, I just said, I know you don't know, but if you did, what could it be? You see, that opens the door, because now I've acknowledged that you don't know, but I've asked you, what could it be? So now you're then going to your schemas or your memories, looking for a reference that came before then. And I think you came back with, but I just don't know. And I said, I know you just don't know, but if you did.
Yeah.
And then
this memory that you'd not thought of for years suddenly pops up.
So what was that memory? Can you tell us about that?
So I was 17 going on a school trip to New York, and one friend hadn't even gone on the trip because he was scared of flying. And then another person that was on the trip was just petrified. And when our flight out, we hadn't had turbulence, but when we came into New York, it was almost like the pilot had to take a slot. So we went from circling and we just dived, and that was horrible. And on the flight home, I was sat next to my friend who was petrified of flying, and just seeing how scared she was, I think that's where it started. I only knew a friend hadn't come on the trip because of his fear, and then she was petrified, and I was like, is there something I'm missing here?
Yeah.
I think that's where we found that it had started.
Absolutely. Because that was.
And we also mentioned that it was the first time away from your parents, and you realised that you're missing them as well, and you had that also in the mix.
So all that kind of combined, and this is again going back to causes of fear of flying. One of them is feeling sort of in a heightened state of negative emotion and feeling a bit traumatized and vulnerable. And in that moment, you did, David, because you first time you're away from both your parents. So you feel vulnerable. You're going very, very far. You've got people around you that are absolutely petrified. So it's kind of, well, hang on a minute, what do they know that I don't? So that combination of all those things placed you in a heightened state of negative emotion, and so you started to feel anxious, and then you kind of transferred all those feelings of anxiety to the aircraft, and then so a trauma is one of the causes, and transference is another cause, and transference is probably one of the more common ones, because when it's a fear of flying because of transference, it's usually because either you have claustrophobia, you have a fear of heights, you might have something called emetophobia, which is a fear of vomit. You might not like to be around people. So if you've got any one of those things, so for example, if you've got a fear of heights or you're claustrophobic, when you're on that aircraft, you're kind of you're high up, you're in an enclosed space, and it's like, oh my God, and you start to feel anxious. And again, you transfer your fear of enclosed spaces or heights to the aircraft. Yeah. So transference is probably a common one, isn't it?
And I think that's really interesting, though, the fact that it's so rare that we ever meet someone who's got an issue with a fear of flying because of an issue with a plane, ever.
Yeah.
It's so rare that someone will say something's ever happened to them on a plane. It is usually 99% of the time something else, another fear that's been
ultimately, let's say,
transferred,
the only time you should have an issue with a plane is if the plane crashes and you get really injured. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, other than that, why should you have an issue with the plane? But again, there's another part to this, David, in the fact that there was a learning as well, because going back then, you were probably very excited because your first school trip to New York, I mean, of all places, how amazing.
Yeah.
So you would expect everyone around you to have that level of excitement.
Can I just say, my school trip, Bollington.
Ah,
David's.
hey,
New York.
Bollington's lovely.
It is.
I mean, I went to Russia.
You did.
Which was very, very random. I look back at that now and I go, it's so weird. Why did I go to Russia on a school trip?
Russia?
I know, we went to Moscow and then we went to St. Petersburg.
Right.
But it's just such a random place to go on a trip.
Really
I have no idea why
Where
we went
did you
there.
go?
Chester Zoo.
Yeah, I was a very exotic.
That was my
weren't I?
penguin
Yeah,
experience.
when he stole a penguin. But anyway.
You stole a penguin?
Yeah. Well, that sounds really bad, doesn't it? But
It was theft.
back then, right, you could actually, there's part of the enclosure that you could go to. And I was just obsessed with animals. And there was a baby penguin and I picked it up and I'm like, take this on. And I had it under my blazer. And I got back on the coach. And we got, I don't know, quite a distance. And it started squawking like really loud, like really loud. And then it was like, sir, Speakman's got a penguin. Right. And then they had to turn round on the coach. And because no mobile phones or anything, and all the parents are waiting. So we got back to the school about an hour and a half late because they had to take the penguin back.
Can I just ask how old you were here? Like, you weren't like 18, were you, at this point? You weren't like a teenager.
I was 11.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Just checking.
Yeah. But
be
anyway,
fair, it
but
sounds
funny
like
thing
something
is,
you'd do now,
I told
so-
this story at one of our workshops, and someone says, that's an urban myth. That's not real. I said, well, and apparently there's an urban myth.
And if I-
I've heard that story before you've told me.
The man, the myth, the
It was
legend.
you.
There he is.
Maybe it was
It's you.
It was me. I don't know what I was going to do with it when I got home. I don't know. But anyway,
I must just add, it's not just penguins. He does bring other animals home. I sent him out with Liv. What was it? Did I send you out for? You went to pick something up for me. I asked them to go shopping. They went. Liv and Nick went off shopping. Get me a few bits. They came back with 2 snakes and a scorpion.
And a tarantula.
Called Pipsqueak.
He got caught up in the shopping. But anyway.
So
These
do not
things
send
happen.
my family out for groceries because
These
they
things
come home
happen.
with reptiles.
A friend of ours went out to buy an iron, came back with a Ferrari. Do you remember
Anyway,
that?
back to David's trip to New York.
See, this is what happens when we don't see
This is
each
what
other for a
happens.
year.
Going back to New York, right? So you're going to New York, incredible. You're really excited, and you would expect everyone at school to be excited too.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just looking forward to it. And then you find out that one of your friends is, I'm not going on a plane.
Mm.
You see, and that's your first learning there. And like up until that point, you're just going to New York, not considering the plane. And then someone says, I'm not going on a plane. You're like, why? What's wrong with planes? Well, I'm not getting on it. So now suddenly planes is a problem.
Yeah.
A bit like if someone says to you, oh, meet my mate Steve, but whatever you do, don't get stuck with him because he's the most boring person on the planet. Straight away, you want to avoid him, don't you?
And you've never even experienced Steve.
Poor Steve.
Steve could be a very nice guy, but yeah. So, I genuinely, I don't remember this, David. So, and I don't know if you do, but can you remember what it was that we said that made a difference to you?
It was everything combined. It's when we found the origin of the fear.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay. And then it was I think Nick had said, don't blame the plane. Think about where these planes have taken you. And I'm like, New York. And then I went to Seattle and I've done that. And I was like, okay. And then it was just, I remember the click. I can't actually remember
what it was,
what exact word, but it was a combination of everything coming together. And then there was a click. Because do you remember we were at that, we were at the airfield and we were in the pilots club.
Yes.
And there was a window to, like where I'm sat now, there was a window to my right. Mm-hmm. And you'd clocked that I hadn't looked out the window. And wherever we were sat, I was facing away from the window. Yeah. And when it all came in and I clicked, and I think you realised that it clicked. And I think one of you went, look to your right. And I looked to my right and I burst into tears. Because I was like, oh, and I felt automatically like a weight just been taken off me.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah, how lovely. And you're right, actually, because a lot of people say to me, well, what is it? And I think some people are looking to us for that one line. But it isn't just necessarily about one line. It's about, first of all, understanding a little bit about aviation and turbulence, because I think that's important. And then the second part is, like you said, that because a phobia is defined as an irrational fear, when we can start to rationalise it, that in itself helps. So if you know the origin and we discovered where you're started, even knowing that already started to make it feel better, because you're then realising, oh, actually, it wasn't the plane, it was the people that I was with, it was the circumstances that I was under. So that's part of it. And then the last part then is giving you lots and lots of evidence about how basically you got it wrong and how aircrafts are really great. And so there is those things, and we will keep throwing information at people until we can see that click moment, which we evidently saw in you.
So and then so the before on that day was going to the airfield, standing next to the plane, which you hated, and then working with you, and then getting on the plane. And on this morning, we always tried to do a bigger test, something that that some people who were comfortable with something might not like that, and which happened by accident, because we then got on the plane, and then we took off, and you were fine, and we were flying around, and you were fine, and you were smiling, which was amazing. And then the plane dropped. I don't know if you remember. Right, there was turbulence, and it just literally dropped. Right. The pilot said it was about 15 feet, but it felt a lot more than that. And in fact, I know you've ever been on that Tower of Terror ride at Disney. That doesn't drop 15 feet, but it feels...
It's awful.
But it just felt really bad. And, right, what we didn't know is the cameraman that they gave us... that we had that day was petrified of flying. So he's in the... So it was the four of us in the plane.
God, right, what a mix. There was me with a flipping fear of turbulence, a cameraman with a fear of flying, and then we had turbulence and the aircraft dropped by 15 feet. What a combo.
And he started... He screamed, didn't he? Right. And then, but what was amazing is you then started to help him.
I remember that. You were calming down the cameraman.
Hang on. Did you pass on the feedback, the information that you got given about turbulence, Eva, that you then passed to David? Were you then passing that on to the cameraman as your own evidence?
It's like, listen, I've got this. You sit down, guys. I started doing just everything I'd learned. And was calming the cameraman down, and then we came into land, and he was like, "Oh, I feel a bit better now."
Can you imagine though, if you're not fully overcome your fear of flying, and you were just nearly there, and then we went on that plane with him.
Oh my goodness, So we've got, in fact, David, you can help us read some of our flying facts out, perhaps. So we're going to make you as part of the pod people of the Speakman's Handbook to Happiness.
Well, he's helping people with their fears of flying already.
Of course, he knows stuff.
Taking credit for my knowledge that I got from somewhere else.
Should we? Because we've got some flying facts, and then we've got some things to consider.
We have.
Right. So I think which is the good stuff. So I think David should read out the things to consider.
Okay. So David, we've got a things to consider list here for you. She says that you can read out to share with our lovely listeners to be able to help them, because what we love is that our listeners can take lots of information from our podcast to help them, or to we're doing facts first. Oh, okay.
Yes, start with the facts.
We're going to start with facts. So Nick's going to start with that facts, then myself, then Liv, and then we'll finish off with David. So go on.
So things to know: commercial aircrafts are both a primary and an auxiliary system.
Great.
Pilots must have a commercial flying license. They are professionals. They often fly multiple times a day, and they've also got families that they want to go home to. And they have to renew their competency every 6 months.
And I think that's so important, can we just say, because I think that a lot of people that struggle with the fear of flying, not that they would anyway, but they don't have any knowledge of how the plane works, right? They don't know how kind of safe a plane is. They don't know the facts about aviation, which of course they wouldn't. But the people that do know those facts are doing that as a job.
Yeah.
Like they've not sat there, gone to school, learnt all those facts and gone, oh, I'm not doing that. That sounds really scary. Do you know what I mean? Like the people that understand it and know, because they know how safe it is, they choose to do it as a job. And despite having families and friends that they want to get back to, still get in a plane and fly.
And that was one of the things that helped me, was considering what I always told myself in those moments of turbulence, when I used to have a fear of turbulence, and literally now I'm not bothered about turbulence at all, and I sleep through it. However, what I always took solace from was the fact that I knew that pilots were professional, and that they had families to go home to, and they wouldn't be putting themselves in danger. And they flew every day, and far more than me, as do the cabin crew. So anyway, have you got any more facts before we move on?
My last one is that remember that turbulence is no different than a boat in a stormy sea, or a car driving down a cobble street, or a street full of potholes. At this point, I would tell a joke about flying.
Go on then.
Why did you encourage him? We should have just said, we don't have time.
I was just being polite.
But you always say my jokes are bad.
And
I'm just thinking...
but I always laugh at them.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking, if I tell a bad joke about flying, it'll just never land.
Oh, help.
See, that's what happens, David, when you encourage
I think I'm
it.
getting my fear back.
So my flying facts, I think this is a really common one that a lot of people, when we've worked with people who have a fear of flying, will say, oh, I'm so frightened that, but what if lightning strikes the aircraft? So back in 1967, when an aircraft was affected by a bolt of lightning, from that moment, aircrafts were modified and designed so that even if they were struck by lightning, the lightning bolt would just run through the aircraft without having any bearing on it at all. So basically they are now designed to be able to be struck by lightning. So, and that's the thing about aviation, is that they are constantly updating, renewing, adding, and that's why it is the most safest form of transport. Every commercial plane can safely fly with just one engine. I thought that was very interesting.
That is mental, that, isn't it?
Isn't it?
So they have two engines, but they can safely fly with just one.
Yeah, but it gets better. It does get better, because most airplanes can actually fly for a very long distance with no engine at all, because they basically, they call it something, it's called glide ratio, due to careful aeronautical engineering.
That's mental,
isn't it? So even if all the engines went out, they would still be able to glide.
But yeah, they have two.
Well, it's a bit like the story of, not a story, it's real, the plane that landed in the Hudson.
Yes.
It was because of the gliding aerodynamics that allowed it just didn't drop out of the sky. Granted, he wasn't able to get back to an airport, but he was able, if you actually look at the distance between where it glided.
It's amazing. So, and I think, and this, I was saying to you about how do you overcome your fear of flying, and any fear is start getting, and we always say, just look for positive contra evidence, and all these facts are exactly that. So Liv, over to you, my dear.
Yeah, so I'll add some more into that. So obviously last year the stats are now in, and 2023 was the safest year for commercial air travel since records began, which goes back to what you were saying about every year it gets safer and safer. And I remember reading a really interesting bit of science on this, which is the fact that when sort of planes were first developed, like many years ago, in the early 1900s, that they didn't have.
They didn't. Do you remember who developed the plane?
Yeah, the Wright brothers.
Yeah, and all the failures prior to that, they were the wrong brothers.
Oh, dear me. Anyway, so obviously back then,
him, look at that face. He's so happy with that joke.
I just thought of that. Yeah,
I could tell. So back then, obviously, airline travel wasn't as safe as it is now, but every year it's getting safer and safer, and now that's why fear of flying is so irrational if you look at now how safe it is. And I read a really interesting stat, which was the fact that actually statisticians have said that it's actually safer to travel on an airplane than it is to be at home. There's more dangers in the home than there is actually being on an airplane. And actually the most sort of dangerous part of your entire day when you fly is actually the travel to the airport, not the actual being on the plane.
A pilot recently told me exactly that you
mental,
are in more danger travelling to the airport than you are on the actual aircraft. Can I just say, Liv, what a hard word that is to get your teeth around. Statistician.
Yeah, he did it in one go as well, yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to say that. I had to think about it.
But interestingly, on a personal note, so when I was at Oxford, I did one of my modules which was about, so interesting. It was a really kind of an offshoot one that I took out of interest, which was about healthcare and basically how we can make healthcare safer. And basically the reason why the psychology was in it is it's looking at, like medical error and things like that, and like kind of how that affects patients and doctors when they have those situations. And in a nutshell, they are trying to now look at how we can use aviation to make healthcare safer, because aviation is one of, if not the safest industry in the world. And it's so safe because, and I won't go into it all now, but they have to do so many checks that it is just literally so incredibly safe. And what they're now looking at is how can we transport that into healthcare so that in hospitals we could like sort of employ those same checking systems to make healthcare as perfect as aviation is, because aviation is so perfect that then healthcare could learn from aviation. And that was basically what I did a whole module on. It was so interesting.
That is quite mind-blowing, actually.
Oh, it was one of my favourite modules I did. It was so like different to everything else I did, but it was so interesting because the guy that I worked with, the doctor that basically is doing all this research, it was called Charles, and he looked like, I shouldn't say this really, but he looked like, in Back to the Future, the doc.
Dr. Emmett Brown.
Yes, from Back to the Future. That was what he looked like, Charles. I loved him so much. He was just the kindest, sweetest man. But yeah, so he's basically leading this research into how we can employ the methods of aviation into healthcare to make healthcare safer.
Fantastic.
So I just wanted to mention that on a personal note. But yes, just a few more stats. So an average of 16,582,222 people flew every day in 2023.
Wow. Over 16.5 million.
Over 16.5 million people flew.
Day. And how many fatalities out of them live?
Zero. 16.5 million every day with zero fatalities.
I mean, that puts it into perspective, doesn't it?
Massively. And I'm also just going to end that with any person can fly.
So you're not bothered who that might be?
Not a specific person.
Just any person.
Could effectively fly every single day for 55,000 years before encountering an incident.
That is amazing.
So unless you're going to live 55,000 years.
Highlander.
And
he did.
And fly every single day of that 55,000 years.
Yeah, then all's good.
Yeah. And even then, even if you're in an incident, that doesn't usually...
Yeah, Hudson River.
Yeah, it's usually not a problematic incident.
Yeah.
But even then, so 55,000 years flying every single day.
Yeah. I think, and quite recently, I think we heard about an incident with turbulence on an aircraft, and somebody... did you hear about that?
Yeah, and but the gentleman, it didn't kill... he had a heart attack.
He did. And it wasn't necessarily... He'd already potentially had a pre-existing condition. But we both said at that moment that isn't that amazing, because it shows that even in the most horrific turbulence, the only the person
which is so rare,
and it is rare because they now have monitors on aircrafts to be able to avoid turbulence, so they know where it is. And they, again, speaking to a pilot quite recently, they were telling us that this is like the brand new thing they're very excited about, is that all the planes are now being uploaded with this new modification that helps them to be able to detect turbulence. Thanks, Nick. So which is great. However, even under that circumstance, the only people that had any injuries were the ones that weren't wearing seatbelts, which is why, put your seatbelt on and then you don't go flying. And then the other person had a pre-existing condition. So again, obviously, as we've all said, look, turbulence isn't great. It's not comfortable. That's what we're saying. It's not comfortable, but it's not dangerous.
So sadly, the gentleman had a heart attack.
He did. That was very sad.
He didn't die on the plane. He had a heart attack later, didn't he?
I'm not sure about that. Maybe. Was it?
Yeah,
I don't hope so, but it'd be nicer to know that he was in someone's care and
I think he was. Yeah. I don't think he had a heart attack on the air.
Well, I hope he'd been somewhere very nice and had a lovely time, wherever it was.
Don't blame the plane.
No, that's exactly.
And I'm going to say probably a lot more people have heart attacks in a hospital, but you'd still go to a hospital if you're ill. Don't blame the hospital.
Smashing that.
Don't blame the plane.
Bit of info. So, David, we just kind of handed some stuff over to you.
Are you happy
to read? It feels like, when you're in class and you go around and you go, right, it's your turn to read out now, David.
It could even be written in code, so we don't even know what we've written quite there. Is it something that you feel happy to read out?
I've noticed that one of them needs a comma, but that's all right. Whoever wrote this. So this is like
things to consider.
Things to consider why you want to go flying, or why you wouldn't. So why do you want to go on holiday?
So you should think about that.
Think about why do you want, we all want to go on holiday because to get away
from...
Well,
and do you know what? That's the interesting thing, that when people have an issue with flying, the focusing on the journey. And, you came here today, and I know that you had cancellation on the train.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't you?
Yeah.
Or just tell us about your journey here today, just for
example. Woke up, I live in a little town called Leighton Buzzard, which is just north of London. And there's been an incident further down the line. Hope whoever's been affected is okay. But it's had an effect on all the trains going north and south. And all the trains were at Leighton Buzzard had been cancelled. So me and my partner jumped in a taxi and went to Milton Keynes because it's a bigger station. And luckily got onto a train that brought us to Stafford, that then took us to Liverpool, which, you know, it's a little bit around the houses, but
you made it.
But you made it because you focused on the destination and you were thinking about what you were going to do when you got here.
Yeah.
You weren't expecting to read that out, by the way, but you focus on the destination. And that's the thing that when people, you know, you're going on holiday to have a nice time and to relax and do all these things that you want to do.
What that is saying to consider, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to thinking about the journey. Because if you thought about the journey coming here, you might have thought, oh, Leighton Buzzard to Liverpool, so many things could go wrong, I'll just leave it. And you won't be sat there right now.
No, but also, like I said to you on the phone, I was like, we're out now. We're out for a day of we're out for a jolly. It's all right. We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's absolutely the right attitude.
And that's what we should think with aircraft is, and I think that's what that point is trying to say is, look, think about your holiday, because that's what you get on an aircraft for. And that's what you should be concentrating on. Anything else on that that's of any interest in use?
So how often, this is something that I kind of think about a lot post my therapy with you guys and actually being able to fly, like how often should you be able to get onto a plane, sit back, relax, get served food and drink, watch a movie? I'm going to add to this, be uncontactable.
Yes.
On your phone. You can use the Wi-Fi, and there's lots of lovely Wi-Fi that they provide for you, but I can really enjoy just going, no, can't go on my phone for a couple of hours, and just have like lack of screen time.
Yeah, and that's it. I would think what we're, again, in that point is trying to say, look, you know, just think how great it is to get on an aircraft. You know, housework to do. You can sit back, read a book, watch a film.
Plan what you're going to do on your holiday.
Yeah, plan what you're going to do on your holiday, get drinks.
A couple of drinks.
Because
I remember before my fear of, when I had my fear of flying, we had this whole conversation about where if I had to get on a plane, I'd have to...
Gin, wasn't it?
It was gin.
Yeah.
Mother's ruin. So I'd have to have a couple of gins before I got on the plane.
I heard it was more than two. I heard it was more than two.
It was probably more than two. Yeah, thanks. So... Now I can get on the flight and have an enjoy. I don't have to drink before it. I can just go on, actually, I'll have a Bloody Mary, thank you. Or, especially if it's an early morning flight. But I can do it, and I'm doing it for help me relax rather than...
Enjoyment.
Yeah.
Any more before we start to pull our handbook to happiness together?
Yep. So you got to remember that a plane is a service provider that will give you memories that is going to be forever. And then the final one is some good affirmations. I am in good hands. I am safe, and my holiday starts now.
Yeah, lovely. And I think affirmations is really important, because I think saying affirmations is a great, if you have any fear, and that affirmation should be in the positive, so that, you know, I am in safe hands. I am going making memories. I am going to have a great time.
And I'm going to add, because I say it every single time I hit turbulence, it's like waves in the ocean.
Yep.
If you hit turbulence, if you just say it's like waves in the ocean, imagine that you're on because you wouldn't be as scared on a rocky ship as you are on a plane. So just imagine that's where you are.
I think as well, from a science perspective, for a little bit of science corner, that when we have a phobia, we tend to look for evidence of why we should fear that thing. And so we're constantly on the lookout. So when you've got a fear of flying, we constantly look out for, evidence of flights going wrong or turbulence or scary things or whatever it might be. So by practicing those positive affirmations, it actually starts to develop new neural pathways in the brain to basically switch to looking for positive things about planes that previously you wouldn't have looked at before.
Absolutely.
So, acknowledging the fact that, if ever you've got on a plane before, why did you get on that plane? To get to a destination. And did it do what it was meant to do? So like David could complain today and say that, he got on these trains to try and get here and it was a disaster. Well, did he get to Liverpool? Yes, he did. So even if it doesn't go as smoothly as you'd like, did ultimately that plane provide what you wanted it to do? Absolutely. So just looking out for those things and starting to switch your perspective up is really helpful.
So I'm going to ask David, this is putting you on the spot here now. So we have this metaphorical handbook to happiness, and this is the page is sort of flying, turbulence, feeling happier about flying. What would you add to our metaphorical handbook to happiness for our listeners?
Can I just steal the stuff that you gave me?
Yeah, go for it.
Exactly.
Is it the advice from the pilot?
It's the advice from the pilot. Yeah, put your hands on some tarmac. Don't blame the plane.
Yes.
Imagine the possibilities that these planes and flights can do for you. So, like, if it hadn't been for you guys, I wouldn't have gone on lovely holidays, but also I wouldn't have done, because I'm an actor, and in between acting jobs, I work on cruise ships quite a lot, and they're always fly-in spots. I wouldn't have been able to do that if it hadn't been for you guys. So, like, 2020, well, not 2020 as much, but, like, after I'd done the tour that I was on when I met you, I spent a lot of that time then just going to and from different ships. I've been to Australia, I've been to South America, I've been to North America, all over Europe, I've been to Asia.
And you've flown to all these places.
All these places.
Amazing.
I've had to fly out, which I wouldn't have been able to do. So, like, think of the opportunities that you're giving yourself up if you don't start flying.
Yeah.
Don't blame the plane. What else was there?
Affirmation.
Affirmation. You know, it's just like waves in an ocean.
Some people like the jelly analogy, don't they? Have you seen that?
Have you
seen that on
jelly?
TikTok?
Yeah, I have seen that on
TikTok.
Tic-tac-tock, yeah.
The jelly thing, which if people haven't seen it, is basically that if you were to sort of get some jelly or jello, if you listen in America, and you were to like get a bit of like a pea or a bit of tissue or something and put it inside the
jelly.
Inside the jelly, that is basically the same analogy for how like turbulence is. It's like if you shake the jelly, the pea that's inside the jelly will like move around a bit, but it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to drop or whatever.
Exactly.
Because it's the pressure's maintained all around that
Correct.
pea, and therefore it might wobble around, but it's still
And the
held
pressure
in place.
is all around the aircraft as
Absolutely,
well.
yeah. So that's just that. So that same sort of thing, isn't it? Really.
So what are you adding, Liv, into our handbook to happiness for flying day?
Yeah,
for flying page.
I think everything obviously David said is fantastic, and I totally agree. I think also the other side of it, as we said, is identifying where your fear of flying comes from. So hopefully things we've said today will sort of start to trigger off some ideas if you've not already thought about that before. But just to reiterate kind of key things that we hear all the time in clinic, because really there is only so many ways that this phobia can start, because, you know, like I said, people tend not to have any bad issues on an aircraft because they are so safe. So usually this phobia comes from either claustrophobia, so thinking about, you know, ever being locked in an enclosed space as a small child, maybe from siblings, that sort of thing.
Or copying a parent.
That's what I was going to go to next. Copying a parent, or another, you know, in David's case, sort of a friend, in, you know, when you're young basically and impressionable and you're learning what isn't safe, you know, how did you see other people reacting, and were they even reacting to something on the plane? It could be even something completely different. The other thing is transference, obviously, of something else. So just to give some examples of things that I've personally heard in clinic, a lady who was going away and she was leaving, she was a sole carer for her daughter, and she'd never left her with anyone before, was leaving her for the first time, and therefore was on the plane panicking about her daughter and transferred that to the plane. So the panic, what did, you know, David said, don't blame the plane. What did the plane do? Nothing, but the panic was about her daughter. So realising where it comes from.
And I've got one on the transference, which I think is probably one of my not favourite in a good way, but most interesting case studies. So we met a lady, again, it was on a TV show, and she had a very chronic fear of flying. And again, what we discovered with her was that, you know, she'd flown and everything was fine, but she'd got into a relationship and she was going away with this person, and whilst on the aircraft had this realisation, what on earth have I done? And the result of that and the anxiety that created, instead of realising it was because of her thinking about that, she transferred all those negative emotions to the aircraft. And then we had another chap who at front, and he was in the RAF, wasn't he? Do you remember he was a pilot? He was in the RAF. He flew.
Yeah, he was in the RAF for years, and obviously flying jets at speed. And then he got a call. He was on an airbase, I think it was in Germany, and he got a call that his father had been taken ill and literally had hours to live. So they got him on the first plane they could get out of the military base and flew him back home. And all the time he was on that plane, he was thinking, I need to see my dad before he passes. I need to see him before he passes. And he wasn't sure if he'd make it in time. And the stress and anxiety of that, he linked to the plane. So then he did see his dad. He was with his dad, I think, for the following day. His dad passed, and then when he was flying back, it was a mess.
It all came to the surface.
And one other that I've just thought about as well is a lady that was ill, basically flying home. She felt really poorly and just kept thinking, I just want to get home because she was really poorly. And also she felt like she might be sick, and she was trapped in between people on a plane, as in like couldn't get to the toilet easily. And so that panic of, oh my God, what if I'm sick? I just want to get home, and all those bad feelings. Again, though, if it's a transference in any of those situations, what did the plane actually do? And if anything, the plane was her friend, because it was taking her home. It was getting her as fast as it could in the fastest way possible
in boat
to where she needed to be. Same with the man with his dad. The plane was actually his friend. It was getting him as fast as possible to the place that he needed to be.
Absolutely.
So it's thinking about that. So, and my final one was a fear of heights as well can also be involved there. So I think identifying, where does it come from? Is it claustrophobia? Is it a fear of heights? Is it transference from something else? Or is it witnessing somebody else panic? And once you know what that is, it's realizing that in any of those instances, what did the plane do? Because as David said, don't blame the plane. The plane didn't do anything wrong in those circumstances. Obviously you might need to seek therapy, but once you know where it's come from, you can then work to basically change your perspective of that, which will then in turn deal with the fear of flying.
I've got one more story to add to that, which is someone that we worked with who had a fear of flying because they got told they didn't like flying. And basically when they were little, they had some issue with their ears. And as you know, when you're flying, when you get the pressure difference, your ears pop.
Oh, and that's terrible.
And which is why they hand sweets out. Sometimes, you can get a little bit of pain in your ears sometimes. But as a little boy, he was screaming because first time on a flight, didn't know what it was. And it's because, and then he actually had a problem with his ears. But he got told that, you were crying because you didn't like flying. And because that kept getting confirmed to him, he had a fear of flying.
The first time you're on an aircraft, you cried, you didn't like flying, but actually it was nothing to do with the aircraft, it was earache.
The inner ear thing is...
Absolutely,
8 out of 10 of my flights, I'll have an issue.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, sucking sweets is the way to go with that.
Well, actually, the one I found is, and this is gross, but I have little things of saline now, and you inhale it. Oh. And I spoke to a flight attendant and said that that's more effective than sucking on sweets.
Well, I never knew that.
Yeah, so I now nasal wash my whole nose before I go on a flight. And
I've heard of that.
And
not had a problem since.
Not had a really problem since. And I just take a little thing of saline just in case, and I sniff on the saline. It comes right out the other side, so you have to have a tissue in your hand. But yeah.
Amazing. So, anything else then before I finish off?
The last thing I would say is we've said don't blame the plane. Stop giving the plane a bad rap. A lot of people say that I've got fear of flying because I'm just not in control, which is a complete excuse because you're getting a taxi and you're not driving that taxi. It's no different. Yeah. So that doesn't work at all.
And I think actually a lot of people will go to that and then they're so adamant on that, and I totally get it because they really believe that's what it is, that it's the being out of control, and then they start looking for therapy to deal with the control issue, which isn't going to actually help the problem because you've still got to find where it began.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's a really good point.
So that one, but then also, obviously you talked about turbulence and how to rationalise that and to reframe that turbulence. But I've been on loads of flights and not had any turbulence whatsoever.
True.
So let's not make turbulence a big deal either, because flights don't always have turbulence because a lot of the pilots will look to actively fly around it. So again, let's bust the myths here. And and people go, but if you go to an airport, you'll notice that there's no Terminal 13. Right, and some actual planes don't have a 13th seat, right? But because what we're doing then is bringing superstitions into things, which again is absolutely rubbish.
I think the thing with control, people say, it's just because I'm not in control. It's actually nothing to that. What you're actually saying is, I can't control the anxiety. That is what's actually happening. But people just don't realise. So my final tip. Are you done with that?
Yeah.
Yep. So my final tip.
Actually, I was going to say something today because I know David likes my jokes.
Go on then.
So apparently we were on a flight and I had this screaming baby at the side of me, and I said to the attendant, I said, "Look, can you move me, please?" I said, and apparently they won't move you if it's your child.
I was going to say, was it live up?
Yeah. My children never screamed on aircraft. In fact,
you never did.
Quick parenting tip, different episode, but a quick parenting tip. What I always did with both Hunter and Liv when we flew, however many hours that flight was, I would buy a little toy for every hour that they didn't know that I had. So little things. I'm talking colouring book, a little puzzle, and every hour I would bring out the next little toy to keep them distracted. And in fact, I always had toys left over because obviously they'd sleep some of it if we were on a long haul. And every time, without exception, when Liv and Hunter were tiny, I had people saying to me, "Oh my gosh, your children are so well behaved."
Yeah, because I think people, when they see a child on the flight, they think, "Oh no,
here we go." But I took that responsibility because I didn't want our kids to be bored, but equally I didn't want them to disturb passengers. So I've done that since you were both babies.
And you still do it now?
I still do it now, because they need a lot of distraction.
So excited.
I'm getting a fight with you.
Honestly, I'm going to tell you that Liv is getting so good at colouring in.
I know, honestly.
Great.
Hang on our flight, when on that little tiny you didn't get me any puzzles
because it wasn't an hour. You see,
you've not reached the 60-minute mark.
Yeah, it's on the hour that the little gift gets.
I just told him to go around again.
So all I'd like to finish off with is first of all to say thank you to David for coming to join us, for coming all this way to come and share your sort of experience with us and our therapy and our approach, and to say that you can get over a fear of flying, even the sceptics like yourself.
Even the sceptics, how could you?
Well,
I didn't know you back then.
But yeah, honestly, thank you. Also, big thank you to David, because when Nick and I were on the run on Celebrity Hunted, David happened to be working at the Crystal Maze at that point, and he put us up for the night, and all of us slept together in the Aztec room. I say sleep.
We didn't sleep.
It was horrific.
It was the worst night's sleep
it
any of us
was
have ever
awful.
had.
I just remember in the morning Nick opening his eyes and going, "David, is there a medic?" My back's killing. But so thank you for honestly, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom, your experience. Thank you for helping us hide away from the hunters when we were on Hunted.
Hey, we smashed that.
We smashed it. Totally it was brilliant. It was so much fun. And to anybody out there who's listening who has a fear, whether it is flying or any other fear, please believe us when we say you absolutely can get over it. Look for the origin, try and find out. You're not born with any phobias. So what happened in my life to make me misunderstand and fear this thing that I'm being fearful of? Find what it is. Write a timeline. Think back, all the experiences. Did I copy a parent? And then lots of positive information to actually disprove the negative and start to looking for the positives in whatever it is that you're fearful of. So if you are listening to this episode today because you do have a fear of flying, we really hope that it has helped, that all the facts have helped, that David's sharing his story has helped, and we would like to wish you very happy travels. Being able to travel and having that freedom will give you memories that you will hold on to, brilliant memories that you'll hold on to for a lifetime. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining us. Wherever you're listening to this podcast today, do be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and we'd be incredibly grateful of a 5-star review.
Oh, and don't forget to recommend our podcast to your family and friends.
And if you'd like to have a look at some more free resources, take a look at our website, nickandeva.com.
If you want to drop us a question, we'd love to hear from you. Send it to admin@speakman.tv.
And you can follow us. We're at the Speakmans on all social media platforms. On YouTube, we're Handbook to Happiness Pod. If you are struggling, do be sure to speak to your general practitioner. And all that's left to say is that we appreciate you spending time with us today.